Tomorrow, a preview of the future as it begins to take shape in the laboratories of the world. Produced by the CBS Television Network. In cooperation with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. This program is brought to you by AMF, American Machine and Foundry Company.
Good evening. I'm David Wayne, and as all of you are, I'm concerned with the world in which we're going to live tomorrow. A world in which a new machine, the digital computer, may be of even greater importance than the atomic bomb. Can machines really think? Even the scientists argue that one.
I don't believe that we can say yet that machines do think. I have a basic question which I always ask, and that is, are these producing anything really new? Until I see a machine producing genuinely new things, I will not agree that machines think.
I confidently expect that within a matter of 10 or 15 years, something will emerge from the laboratories which is not too far from the robot of science fiction fame.
The Thinking Machine, starring David Wayne. In a moment, that story.
With me tonight is Professor Jerome B. Wiesner, Director of the Research Laboratory of Electronics at MIT. Dr. Wiesner, what really worries me today is what's going to happen to us if machines can think. And what interests me specifically is, can they?
Well, that's a very hard question to answer. If you'd asked me that question just a few years ago, I'd have said it was very far-fetched. And today I just have to admit I don't really know. I suspect if you come back in 4 or 5 years, I'll say, sure, they really do think.
Well, if you're confused, Doctor, how do you think I feel? Professor Wiesner, I don't think I have to tell you that the conception of the robot, a thinking machine, has been man's dream for centuries, also his nightmare. Of course, up until recently, the exploitation of that dream has been largely in the hands of science fiction writers and my colleagues in the motion picture industry. Do you remember a great robot in the silent film Metropolis?
No, I don't think I ever saw that one.
Well, I'd like you to see that.
It'd be very nice.
Okay, Charlie, roll them.
That movie professor is still way ahead of us, you know.
Is he?
He is, and you know, if I'd seen that movie as a youngster, I'd probably been afraid of science.
Doctor, when that film was made, and it wasn't too long ago, the thinking machine concept was still in the realm of make-believe. What do you think about it today?
Well, the reason that's such a very hard question to answer is we know so very little about thought processes or about information that makes up thought processes. You know, there are many things which machines can do today which, if they were done by human beings, you would certainly call thinking. Have you ever watched a child try to learn the alphabet? I've got a piece of film here that I'd like to have you see.
Down, up, down, up. Do you know that letter? Oh, M? No, it looks like an M, but it isn't. It's a W. An M upside down, isn't it? I'm going to make an X there, and you see if you can draw over the same lines that I make. Down, up, down, and up. Can you do that? The same lines, honey. That's right. That's fine. What letter is it?
W.
That's right, good. Now you see if you can make it.
Of course, she makes mistakes at first. The real question is, how does she ever learn to get them right?
I can copy yours.
That's right, you copy mine.
Well, do you mean to tell me that you don't even know yet how a child learns the letters of the alphabet?
Psychologists who study the problem have a lot of ideas about what goes on, but no real explanation. A letter is simply a pattern, and we don't yet know how the brain recognizes patterns.
Do you know what letter that is?
L.
No, it's a P.
Well, do you think you'll ever understand these problems?
I think so. That's one reason we're so interested in the computer and what it can be made to do.
Are you suggesting that the computer can do what this child is doing?
Yes, I am. The computer is a remarkable machine, and later on in the program we're going to see it write an original TV Western. But first, let's see how the youngster is doing here.
What letter is it?
L.
P. Now, can you tell me what this letter is? Do you remember this one? It's a W.
Now let's see if the computer has as much trouble with the alphabet.
You mean we're going to see the computer do what the child did?
I hope so.
Now, does that really prove that machines can learn?
I'll tell you what it does. It compares the letter you write with the letter you first showed it. And as it gets more and more information about what is called a W, for example, it is more and more better able to make a judgment about whether the letter that's being written on the screen is, in fact, a W or not. Let's see.
Okay, Larry, let's read in the program again.
Well, at least I know what a program is. A program's the rules you want the computer to follow. Now what are they doing? Showing the computer the alphabet for the first time?
Yes, in just the same way the teacher did with a child. Incidentally, for convenience, you see, we're using P's and W's, too.
Okay, now we have those characters in the machine. We'll try some tests with them. Here's a W. Call it a D. That's pretty poor, but on the other hand, it doesn't have much knowledge. Well, here's a P for it. Try another P. Should get it this time. Okay. Wow.
Well, now that's luck. That's pure luck.
No, as a matter of fact, one thing the computer can't do is fool the teacher. On the next try, look at the line below the letter. The longer the line, the surer the computer is of its answer.
Good enough. That's a pretty good percentage, as indicated by that bottom bar. 80%, sure. That's pretty good.
Now, do you call that learning?
Well, I know that if my wife and I saw our kids going through that process, we'd call it learning. So, machines really can learn.
You know, we don't really know much about the thought processes, and this is why I'm so hesitant. But we are studying the problem. It's being studied in very many places and by people in many disciplines.
You mean psychologists, psychiatrists, philosophers, and so on?
Yes, and electrical engineers and mathematicians and others.
Well, if the computer is this important, why haven't I heard more about it?
Well, the computer is a relatively new thing, and we're just really getting an appreciation for the full range of its usefulness. Many people think it's going to spark a revolution that will change the face of the earth almost as much as the first industrial revolution did.
Well, now this brings me back to my original question. Can machines think? Now, I mean by that thinking, that process we try to avoid when we have a problem to solve.
You mean like I'm trying to do in avoiding your question? Do you remember that puzzle about the cannibals and the missionaries?
I do remember that. That's when we tried to cross the river with the missionaries and the cannibals without the missionaries getting eaten.
Yes, that's the one. Well, out at Carnegie Tech, Professors Simon and Newell are doing some very interesting work trying to understand that kind of logical problem. Let me show you. This is Professor H.A. Simon.
3 missionaries and 3 cannibals are trying to cross a broad river so that they can reach a town on the other side. They have a rowboat, the cannibals. They have a rowboat, which will, however, hold only 2 at a time. All of them know how to row. There's one difficulty. No group of missionaries and cannibals may be on either side of the river at any time if the cannibals in the group outnumber the missionaries, because the missionaries would be eaten. Now, the problem is to plan a series of trips that will get all 3 missionaries and all 3 cannibals across the river in the boat without anyone being eaten. Do you have any questions now, Barbara? Well, you may start now. Please remember to say aloud as much as you can about what you're thinking, and you may move the missionaries and cannibals to try different combinations of them.
There's only one boat.
There's just one boat, and only 2 can sit in it at a time. Why don't you take them across and see how it would work, remembering that the boat always has to come back with someone to get the next load.
Then I have the missionary bring the boat back and take one of the missionaries.
Careful, that man is going to get eaten.
Well, I guess I wouldn't do that. Is it possible for any of them to swim?
No, I'm afraid they are non-swimmers.
Well, I'll bring one of the missionaries over by himself.
Poor Barbara. You know, I sympathize with her. I remember how baffled I was the first time I tried that problem.
Well, Barbara's bright, and she'll get it after a bit. As a matter of fact, in a moment I'll show you her solution. That's why Professor Simon asks her to talk aloud as she works, so you'll have a record of what she says.
And then I'll bring the other one over, and that's it.
Very good. That's the correct solution. And now we'll go and try the same thing out with the computer on the coast.
Oh, no. Now, don't tell me you're going to try to get that computer to do the same thing. Has it found the solution already?
Yeah, and in just a second we'll have a chance to look at the answer.
Is that the answer you have there?
Yes, as a matter of fact, it's both answers. We've typed out Barbara's solution on computer paper, too. Can you tell which is which?
Do I have to answer that? How does the machine do it, Doctor?
Well, Professor Simon thinks that logical processes are really quite simple and only appear complex because there are so many of them in cascade.
Well, does that mean that the machine tries every possible answer?
No, it does just what a person does. It tries those things which seem most likely.
Well, how does the machine know what's likely?
Well, a person knows what's likely on a basis of experience. The machine knows what's most likely on a basis of probabilities or reasonableness that has been programmed into it, that is told to it in advance.
Well, what else can computers do?
Well, many things, though, as I've already said, we're just really beginning to understand the capabilities of the computers. I've got some film to illustrate this point, which I think will amaze you.
That man isn't playing checkers against a computer, is he?
Sure, and it plays pretty well.
Now, which color is the machine playing?
Black. The player pushes those switches to tell the machine his moves. Incidentally, he has to make the machine's moves on the checkerboard as well.
Well, then how does he determine the machine's moves?
By watching those lights on the console. The machine also prints out its moves.
Who's that watching?
He's Dr. A.L. Samuel, an MIT graduate, now with IBM. Dr. Samuel programmed the computer to play checkers so he could study machine learning. Let's see what it's printing out now.
How in the world did it do that? Dr. Wiesner, how does a computer work?
Well, it would take too long to give you a detailed explanation, but I think I can give you a simple explanation of the principles if you want. You can make a little box that you can put signals into, and every time you put a pulse into it, it adds. And with these devices, you can make adders, you can make multipliers, and you can make devices which do a number of other mathematical operations. Now, with these various building blocks, and it takes just a very few of them, you can organize much more complicated mathematical problems. And what you do is what we call programming. You lay out a series of steps, and you have to tell the machine every blessed single step you want it to do, because it can't do anything unless you do this. And this we call a program. We feed it into the machine, and it carries out the operations we've told it to do one at a time. Of course, there is a saving grace here, which is very important. And once the machine has learned how to do something, it can print out into its permanent memory the tape or on a piece of paper of the kind we've seen, the instructions for doing this, and you never have to think about that particular thing again.
Well, does the nervous system work like a computer?
No, not really, though there are many similarities between computers and living nervous systems. But neurophysiologists who work on the problem think there are many more differences than there are similarities. The fact of the matter is, though, that both systems use electrical signals, that is, electrical potentials and pulses.
Well, then, by following the complicated steps that a computer takes, the steps and stages in solving a problem, can you learn how or more about how the nervous system works?
Well, what you can learn is a good deal about thought processes, or at least simulated thought processes by this method, but it's very dangerous to carry this analogy too far.
Well, if I told you all about my particular problem, could you solve that on a computer?
Well, it'd probably take a
Well, that's
psychiatrist.
my problem. I think I better ask my question over again. You have to tell a computer what to do. In other words, all of the computers that we've seen have been programmed, that is, have been told by men what to do.
Yes, but you know, that's really not a valid argument, because there's every evidence that men are programmed too. That is, they have certain built-in programming.
Now, wait a minute, Dr. Wiesner. Are you suggesting that men are born with something put in their brains, like men put information into a computer?
Yes, they're not only born this way, but they get programming in other ways. That is, there are really two ways in which you can get programming. There is the hereditary part, that is the part you're born with. And you can also get information or programming in your brain by experience, that is, by learning.
Well, surely in higher animals, learning is more important.
We like to think that anyway.
Can you give me an example of programming in something that's alive?
Yes, I can. I've got something over here. Can you tell me what this silhouette's supposed to represent?
Well, it doesn't remind me of anything in particular.
If I hold it up here like this, does it look like a goose to you?
Yes, it does.
Now, if I turn it around, what's it make you think of?
Well, if we're still thinking about birds, I'd say it was a hawk.
You did pretty well. Let's see if a duck can do as well. The ducklings used in this experiment have been raised in isolation. They've never seen any other birds.
And there I see is our friend the goose. Well, there wasn't any reaction at all, was there?
No, there wasn't. That's what interested Professor Melzack. You're seeing what happened when he first did this experiment in the London Zoo. If you were a duck, would you worry if you saw a goose?
You mean he will worry when Professor Melzack changes that goose into a hawk?
Well, let's watch.
Oh, that's a really frightened duck.
Well, not all ducks react this way. Some are simply wary when they see their first hawk. Mr. Wayne?
Well, what I gather from this is that this duck that never had been exposed in its life to any other kind of a bird can now suddenly differentiate between a goose and a hawk. Now, you call that some kind of programming. To me, that's what I would call instinct.
Well, I'd agree with you. Instinct is the word you use. I'm using programming, or at least that part of programming which is determined by heredity. You see, animals seem to start life with a large part of their nervous system knowing what to do. That's the reason why we breathe and why our heart beats and why babies know how to cry or when to cry when they need help.
Well, do you mean that instinct turns out to be some kind of programming that we're born with?
Yes, that's using our language. Let me show you some very interesting research that was done on the frog last year at MIT by Professors Lettvin and Maturano, which seems to indicate that some animals, at least, are born with very much more built-in information than we used to suspect was the case.
Well, does it show that we're born with programming?
But what it does show is that in the frog, at least, the frog's eye reports only very specific information to the brain.
You mean that the optic nerve of the frog doesn't report everything it sees?
No, it reports only very specific things, things which seem to be very important to the survival of the frog. Let's take a look at the next film.
Well, now, the frog doesn't pay any attention to those dead flies. Isn't he hungry?
Sure, but his eyes don't see them. He's hungry, all right. Watch.
Well, if he didn't eat any of the dead flies, why did he eat the fly on the string?
Well, you know, that's what Professor Letvin's trying to find out. It seems that the frog only sees things that move. Here, Letvin's looking through the microscope into the frog's brain, preparing to put a tiny electrode into one of the fibers in the frog's optic nerve.
You mean when the fiber sees something, it'll send a signal through the electrode that we can see?
Yes, and you'll hear it, too. Now Professor Lettvin is putting a target, that semicircular hemisphere, in front of the frog's eye. And then, using a magnet on the back of the target, he can move a small metal disc around the target until he finds the point at which the particular fiber is looking. There, he's found it. See, it sends an electrical signal through the electrode.
Well, what's the professor doing now?
Well, he's trying to find out just what kind of things make this particular fiber react.
It looks to me as though this fiber reacts every time something moves.
It does.
Well, that could explain why the frog didn't eat the dead flies. They didn't move, so he couldn't see them.
Well, that's Professor Letvin's suggestion, anyway. He said to himself, suppose the fibers in a frog's eye look only for specific kinds of things in the world around them. Now, as we've seen, one kind of fiber apparently only reports movement. And here, Professor Lettvin is looking for a different kind. You see, this fiber reports to the brain when anything small enough to eat moves into view, and it keeps reporting as long as the object remains there.
Well, why did it stop reporting when the light went out and then fail to report when it came back on?
Well, think of the light going off as a shadow passing overhead, an owl, say. And apparently in a dangerous situation, the frog's eye only reports the danger, not food. Watch now as a long bar has passed through the field of vision. The bar is too straight and too big to be a bug, so you see there is no reaction. Professor Letvin's work suggests that the fibers from the frog's eye only report specific things to the brain, things related to the frog's survival. One group of fibers looks only for sharp edges. Another group, this one, seems to be a bug detector.
Well, now, I was always under the impression that the eye reported all light patterns.
Well, so are we all. I ought to add, though, that Professor Letvin's theories are not yet accepted by all people in the scientific community, or at least insofar as the implications about human vision are concerned.
Well, if Professor Letvin's theories are correct, we would have some explanation for instinct, wouldn't we?
Well, the existence of built-in coding or instinct was never really in doubt, although this is a very interesting demonstration of it. It's a demonstration, at least, of one kind of instinct, because it's obvious that the frog didn't learn to recognize flies, but was born with this ability already in its brain.
Well, now, if I may say so, people aren't frogs, are they?
Well, no one really suggests that people are pre-coded to the same extent that frogs are, but it's very clear that people also are born with a certain amount of information built into their nervous system. Let me show you something that'll prove this point. We're going to Geneva to the laboratories of Professor Jean Piaget and his associates. This is Dr. Barbel Inhelder working with a youngster of 5. By the way, how's your French, Mr. Wayne?
Well, it's not very good, I'm sorry to say.
Well, Dr. Inhelder here is filling one glass with milk. Then she's asking the child to fill his with exactly the same amount as she has in hers.
Du lait à boire exactement la même chose dans ton verre.
Oh, trop, c'est un peu trop.
The boy says, you've a little too much.
On va enlever un peu.
Is it now the same height?
Oui. Oh non.
Non, pas encore. Faut que ce soit exact.
Voilà.
Exactement la même chose.
Là, c'est la même chose.
Exactement la même chose. Regarde. C'est parfait.
Non.
He's a real stickler, isn't he?
Comme ça.
Oui.
Voilà. On a exactement la même chose à boire.
Oui.
Moi, j'aimerais boire mon lait dans ce grand verre.
I would prefer to drink my milk in the tall glass. I have poured it all in the tall glass.
Tu vois?
Oui.
Alors, regarde. Toi,
You and I, have we still the same amount?
de lait à boire?
Non.
Non. Qui a
Who
plus
has
à
more?
Verre.
Ici, dans ce verre,
this
il y a
glass?
plus à boire. Comment le
But
voit?
how do you know?
Parce qu'il est plus grand.
Because it is taller.
C'est chou.
Well, that's delightful, isn't it? Now, how could that child make that mistake?
Well, apparently, when we're born, we rely exclusively on our eyes to form our concepts of the world around us. He apparently had certain preconceived notions of the world around him, and some of these are wrong, and as he grows up, he's going to have to learn to correct them.
Well, then our eye apparently is programmed to tell us that that which is taller holds more.
Yes, and in nature, isn't that generally the case?
Well, I've always been under the impression that seeing is believing.
Well, actually, it's just the opposite. These experiments indicate that we tend to see only those attributes of objects which our nervous system is designed and programmed to see.
Then seeing isn't believing, but believing is seeing?
Well, it works both ways, but certainly believing is seeing. Watch this next piece of film.
Okay. Professor Wiesner, I've seen this before. Now, that window isn't square. You see, one side is longer than the other.
Yes, but no matter how many times you've seen it, I'll bet you still can't see through the illusion. What's the window doing now?
It's revolving. I know it's revolving.
Of course it is, but I'm certain that you don't see it that way. You see it as though it were oscillating back and forth.
Well, as a matter of fact, you're right.
You see, your eyes tell you that anything that is longer is closer to you, and your experience tends to confirm this. So you have to see the long side of the window as though it were in front, even when it's in back. You just can't see it revolve. Now, let's cover the window with a cloth. The cloth sides are equal in length. Now maybe your brain will let you see the window rotate. Look at the bottom corner of the cloth. Now do you see it revolve?
Yes, I do.
Now let's put a tube through the window. What do you see this time?
Well, that tube is bending back on itself.
You know why? That's because you've assumed the tube is made of rubber. Now, if you tell yourself that it's made of steel, you'll see it cut through the window instead of bending. Am I right?
Well, I have to think real hard that it's steel, right?
Right.
It's steel, it's steel, well, I'll be. Yes, you are right.
Now then, doesn't that prove that you tend to see what you believe?
You mean, Professor, that I am somewhat programmed? In other words, that there are rules built into me that make me react sometimes similarly to a machine?
Yes, and you and everyone else.
Well, I think I'm beginning to get your point. I am born with certain rules built into me. But I think I can think. That is, I say I can think. Therefore, I shouldn't be too upset when a machine thinks just because it has rules built into it by man.
Well, that's logical, isn't it?
Well, can you show me where a computer can do anything original? I think that might help to convince me.
Well, it depends an awful lot on what you mean by original. Would you regard writing a television western as being original?
Now, do I have to answer that? But do you mean to tell me that a computer can really write a play?
Well, we can write pretty good plays. As a matter of fact, after
We will see the playlet written by the computer in just a moment. But first, from AMF, an expression of one company's aims in your interest.
You were saying that a computer can write a play?
Sure, and I'll show you. It won't be as good as Shakespeare, but it'll be better than a lot of the westerns you look at. I suspect by now you've seen enough of computers in action. So let's just watch the computer print out its play. That's Harrison Morse, who did most of the work on this computer program.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. If that computer ever learns to act, I'll tear its transistors out by the roots. You know, that's as close to magic as anything I've ever seen, Doctor.
Well, you know, it isn't really magic. Let's have Doug Ross, who's on the staff at MIT and who supervised the writing of the program for this playlet, explain it to us.
Well, we had a lot of fun working on this program, but we're not just playing games. We're trying to illustrate some important things about artificial intelligence. Just as a human playwright must obey certain rules in order to have a meaningful and understandable play, one that seems natural for people to actually act out, we must make the computer aware of the same kinds of rules. So what we're trying to show are that intelligent behavior is rule-obeying behavior. We're trying to show what these rules look like, and we're trying to show how a computer can be made to do creative work. In the type of play that our program is designed to write, we have a robber enter, wait for the sheriff, and when he enters, they have a shoot it out, and one or the other will die, and the winner, if any, will pick up the money and walk out the door. The human playwright would know already things that we have to teach the computer by programming. For instance, if the gun is in the hand and the hand is on the robber and the robber is in the corner, the human knows immediately that the gun is also in the corner. But we must make the computer able to keep track of all these things. This switch shows how the computer will choose reasonable alternatives for the sheriff. Depending upon whether or not the sheriff can see the robber and the robber sees the sheriff may wait, advance on the robber to get a better shot, or try immediately to shoot the robber. We have given the computer rules for determining reasonable behavior, and we have also given the computer rules for modifying those rules. For example, we have an inebriation factor, which controls the actions of the robber depending upon how much he has had to drink. The more the robber has to drink, the more inebriated he will become, so that he becomes less and less intelligent in his behavior. Notice that the computer is still being intelligent and not violating physical rules, but the character of the actor is changing as he becomes more and more inebriated. And that is one of the main points that we're trying to show here, is that intelligent behavior is rule-obeying behavior, and there is no black magic about doing these things on machines. It's marvelous to do them on machines, but far from miraculous.
Well, now, that makes it seem almost reasonable. But even so, how can I be sure that the computer wrote the script and not the scientist?
Well, you know, if we had written the script and stored it in the machine's memory, it would print out the same play every time.
Doesn't it?
No, it doesn't. As a matter of fact, the plot is the same. The play it writes is different every time. It's sort of like a mystery story writer. Matter of fact, we've written about 50 plays, and here are several of them the machine has printed out. Would you like to see another one of them?
Certainly would.
Okay.
Well, I can see there's one thing that the computer doesn't know. In television, the bad guy's supposed to lose.
Yeah, you know, there are many things the computer doesn't know. And even worse, sometimes the computer just doesn't work.
Well, what happens then?
Well, almost anything. For example,
Well, what happened there?
Well, you know, making a program for a computer involves a fair amount of trial and error, and what you've just seen was one of the errors.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, now look, if a machine can do all these things today, what's going to happen tomorrow?
Well, it depends on many things. It depends on how much we are able to find out about learning processes. As I told you before, there are several ways we're going about trying to understand information processing systems, including the nervous system. And one very important one is working with humans. This experiment is taking place in Professor Walter Rosenblatt's laboratory at MIT. Through these earphones, Dr. Geiser will put a series of rapid clicks into the subject's ears.
I'm going to turn the clicks on.
Now he's going to record the signal coming from the electrodes in the headset. The response to that signal as it appears on the outside of man's skull.
But hasn't this kind of recording been done for a good many years?
Well, no. Recording from the skull has been done for a long time, but what you used to get was a picture of all the electrical activity in the brain. In these experiments, the computer lets us concentrate on the specific electrical activity that's a direct result of the clicks that the man hears.
In other words, Dr. Wiesner, the computer allows you to learn a little more about signals in the human brain than you knew before.
Well, the peaks and valleys you see there are a result of the clicks that that man is hearing. Incidentally, as it almost always does, pure research has a number of applied and usually unpredictable values as well. In this case, here we're seeing the John Tracy Clinic in Hollywood. These techniques are being used to determine deafness in children. Another way of studying these logical processes we've been talking about that take place in the brain and in giant computers is going on at the Lincoln Laboratory. This is a laboratory which we operate for the Department of Defense. Here is housed one of the world's largest and most versatile computers. We call it the TX2. It took a great many men several years to build, and we're still working on it, improving it all the time. This enormous collection of wires, tubes, transistors, and circuits connects the largest computer memory now operating. That's the memory over there.
All that's a memory?
Yes, it is. You know, it contains about 2.5 million memory units, primarily ceramic cores in this case. Huge as it is, it holds only a tiny fraction of the elements that are housed in the human brain. People estimate that our brain holds about 10 billion neurons.
10 billion?
Yes, and unbelievable as that is, this comparison is probably very misleading because neurophysiologists believe that each neuron fulfills many more functions than a single vacuum tube or transistor.
So you have to use huge installations like this to find out how signals move between the brain's neurons?
Well, you know, this is really pretty small to simulate anything as complicated as the brain. This gadget only has about 1,300 neuron-like elements. If you put signals into the two edges, you can make a wave travel through the device and study the behavior of signals in such networks. That's what Belmont Farley is going to do here.
Are scientists everywhere using computer machines like this to study learning?
Yes, they are. You know, once an idea like the computer exists, people everywhere begin using it. That's one of the reasons why there can't really be any secrets in science for very long. Matter of fact, I recently saw work similar to this in Russia.
Well, if fabulous machines like this are being developed everywhere, what's going to happen to us all tomorrow? Who's going to be in charge, machines or men?
Men, I hope. You know, you can always pull the plug. A French artist named Jean Tinguely tries to prove this point, as a matter of fact, by building machines that do absolutely nothing. You know, modern research can chew up money faster than Tingley's machines do it. And you know what he's doing here? By pumping that bicycle, he's drawing a picture.
Oh, that really is wild. Well, now, seriously, Professor, do you think that one day machines will really be able to think?
Well, I think so, but people still disagree about it. Let's hear what a few scientists have to say about it.
I don't believe that any of the machines that we know today can think. I have a basic question, which is, do these machines produce anything really new? When you consider the great new ideas produced by men like Newton and Darwin and Galileo, you'll find that initially they had to throw away the old rules that they'd been brought up with. Now, machines do what they've been told to do. They obey the rules that have been fed into them by man. And we know of no machines at present which have means of overcoming this limitation.
I have little doubt that we'll be able to produce machines and computer programs that will behave in a fashion that we speak of as intelligent, that these will be of great aid to man in terms of relieving him of intellectual work that is not fit for human production. Where my doubt comes in is whether we shall be able to produce machines and machine programs that are capable of creative thinking. I doubt very much, with the usual type of human vanity, that any artificial information processing system will ever be able to do this kind of inventive things. I rather doubt whether it's going to be possible to do this in our lifetime.
I'm convinced that machines can and will think. I don't mean that machines will behave like men. I don't think for a very long time we're going to have a difficult problem distinguishing a man from a robot. And I don't think my daughter will ever marry a computer. But I think that computers will be doing the things that men do when we say they're thinking. Now, machines can't write good poetry or produce deathless music yet, but I don't see any stumbling block in a line of progress which will enable them to in the long run. I'm convinced that machines can and will think in our lifetime.
Well, now that's pretty unnerving stuff. Don't you think it's going to have tremendous repercussions in the days to come?
I'm sure that it will. It's going to have many effects, direct and indirect.
What would you say those effects would be?
Well, in the direct effects, we're going to put machines to work for us in many ways. By indirect, I mean that we're going to learn many things while we work with the computers that will help us in other fields that we're interested in. For example, in the field of mental health, social problems, and economic problems, just to mention a few.
Well, how do we put the computer specifically to work?
Well, you know, my colleague at MIT, Professor Norbert Wiener, says we're living through the second industrial revolution today.
The first industrial revolution being the replacement of manual labor by machinery?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And the second, then, you say, will be the assistance of the human mind by the computer.
And I'm certain that as time goes on, we're going to find ways to do many things using the computer which the unaided mind just could not do by itself. The future of the computer is just hard to imagine. Let's listen now to Professor Shannon, who we heard briefly at the beginning of the program. And also, I would like you to remember that when he talks about robots, he doesn't mean, well, a pretty girl like our good friend Dr.
Rothwang?
Yes, Rothwang, created at the beginning of the program. But what he really means is machines that can do things that man wants them to do.
In discussing the problem of simulating the human brain on a computing machine, we must carefully distinguish between the accomplishments of the past and what we hope to do in the future. Certainly the accomplishments of the past have been most impressive. We have machines that will translate to some extent from one language to another, machines that will prove mathematical theorems, machines that will play chess or checkers. sometimes even better than the men who designed them. These, however, are in the line of special purpose computers aimed at particular specific problems. What we would like in the future is a more general computing system capable of learning by experience and forming inductive and deductive thoughts. This would probably consist of three main parts. In the first place, there would be sense organs akin to the human eye or ear, whereby the machine can take cognizance of events in its environment. In the second place, there would be a large, general-purpose, flexible computer programmed to learn from experience, to form concepts, and capable of doing logic. In the third place, there will be output devices, devices in the nature of the human hand, capable of allowing the machine to make use of the thoughts that it has, of the cognitive processes, in order to actually affect the environment. Work is going on all of these fronts simultaneously, and rapid progress is being made. I confidently expect that within 10 or 15 years, we will find emerging from the laboratories something not too far from the robot of science fiction fame. In any case, whatever the result, this is certainly one of the most challenging and exciting areas of modern scientific work.
Exciting and challenging, but doesn't it worry?
Well, sure it worries me. But you know, the problems posed by the computer are really no different than the problems we have with other products of technology. It's going to take a great deal of wisdom on our part to manage them, but if we do, we're going to make a much better world.
Thank you, Dr. Wiesner.
The story of the next Tomorrow program in a moment. But first, a word from AMF, American Machine and Foundry Company. Next month, over many of these same stations, Tomorrow will present Big City 1980, a picture of the city you will live in tomorrow. Check your local listings for the time.